Hi, this is Stephanie Stock from Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom. I'm the Vice President and PR Chair, and I'm also a physical therapist assistant. Today we're discussing the process that victims face and their families when they go through the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 granted vaccine manufacturers complete immunity from liability from their products and set up a taxpayer-funded compensation program for families and children that were damaged by vaccines. There's a 75-cent tax on every vaccine that's given, and that's what funds this pool for payouts. To date, the NVICP has paid out over $3.8 billion in compensation for vaccine injuries and deaths. I'm here today with Braden Blumenstiel. He's an attorney focusing in vaccine injury. He earned his law degree here at OSU, and he has a master's in psychology from the University of Dayton. Braden is currently a partner at the law firm of DuPont and Blumenstiel, and he prides himself on working especially hard to help clients who have suffered the devastation of vaccine injury. Braden, how would you explain a little bit about vaccine injury attorneys, how they're certified, or if there's a special process for that?
There's not a special certification. These petitions go through the Federal Court of Claims in Washington, D.C. You have to be admitted to that court system in order to work on these types of claims. Basically what you do is you apply to the court. They have to see that you're an attorney in good standing in your own state. Then you also have to have letters from two attorneys that vouch for your character and your work ethic, things of that nature. Then they review your application and you can start working there.
Okay, all right. I know your dad got into vaccine injury law before he retired. Was that kind of the driving force, or was there something in particular that pushed you to want to do vaccine?
Yeah, my dad definitely is the reason that I got into this area. My firm had a background doing personal injury work for over 40 years, and that was what I started out in. But one day in 2008, a young girl and her mom came into the office to meet with my dad. It was not the typical personal injury case. This girl had an adverse reaction to a Gardasil shot. They came in and met with my dad, and since I was a younger attorney, he got me involved as co-counsel. Didn't know anything about vaccines. I knew that they existed, but I didn't know that people could have an adverse reaction to it. But with this girl, it absolutely devastated her entire life and her family. She had been a very good student, athletic, involved in sports. After this, she couldn't even go to school. So based on that case, we learned a lot about the National Vaccine Act. And we filed a petition on her behalf and went through the system, and that was kind of our first learning case. After that, my dad his name started to float around in these circles, and he started getting more Vaccine Act cases. He had done those for the last 10 years, and I started to get involved in that as well. He recently retired, and I've taken over his remaining cases, and so it's something that now my new law firm, we are trying to make a pretty significant part of our practice. So that's how I got into it.
Okay, all right. We've read that only about a fourth to a third of the injury cases actually receive compensation that go to court, and it typically can take between 2 to 10 years to receive it. What's the most difficult part of the process for families going through this?
It's, I think, the fact that they have to see what goes on with their loved one who's been harmed by a vaccine and go through the process. It is a slow process. They want to have it go quickly. Unfortunately, there's only 8 special masters that deal with these cases, and so they're just overwhelmed. And as a result, these cases go very slow. And during that time, they have to see someone they really, really love who's been devastated by a vaccine. And the process itself can be challenging and difficult. The medical records of the petitioner are scrutinized, and at times, a lot of times, the families feel as though they're not being believed. And I think that when they have to deal with a loved one who has had devastating reaction to a vaccination and then be viewed as not truthful, that is the hardest thing that I've seen for the families.
Yeah, and I've heard complaints from families as well on that very thing. You know, it's like, this happened to me, I was doing what the system told me I needed to do. They have a program that's supposed to compensate me if my child's one of the children that are injured, and yet I'm being treated like some sort of criminal or something who's being scrutinized, and that's a very painful process for them because they just want validation that, you know, my child was hurt, and I just want somebody to believe me and help me. And so that's a real struggle, I'm sure, for them.
Yeah, it's tough.
And how do they deal with the injuries during the period before they even can get compensation? How does that work?
Well, as we've discussed, it takes a long time usually between filing a petition and actually getting compensation. And I wish I had some great easy answer for families in this position. It's difficult because the program will not pay for medical during this time period because they want to see whether the injury is actually compensable. And so you won't get funds from the National Vaccine Act while you're going through this process. A lot of times you just have to rely on your own health insurance. Some people don't have health insurance. Others, their health insurance may exclude vaccination claims. I wish I had some great resource that I could tell you about. Certainly if I come across something like that, I'll make it known as much as I can.
Yeah. Now, who pays for your expenses? How does that work?
One of the good things about this program is that the court, the fund, will pay all attorney's fees and expenses, and regardless of whether the claim is found compensable or not. So the families that are going through this will never have to worry about paying an attorney or the expenses associated with working up the petition.
That's great. That's great. Has there been any increase in people contacting you about vaccine injury in the recent years? And if so, what contributes to that, do you think?
Yes, there have been. One, I think it's just that this is becoming a focus of my firm. And so we are trying to take active efforts to educate the public about the fact that, one, there are adverse reactions to vaccines, and two, that there's a program that is designed to help compensate those families. So I think it's just part of it is the efforts that my firm is putting forth, trying to educate the public. As a result, we get more people contacting us. Two, I think people around the nation are slowly learning about this. I think there's more awareness coming up about it. And as a result, they go online, they look for, when they have someone that has a devastating reaction to a vaccine, they look online for an attorney, and as a result, we're one of those firms out there, and so they contact us.
Yeah. Now, is there a particular type of injury or a vaccine that get more calls than another, or they're more prevalent as far as being compensated?
Well, one, we had the first one that I had was Gardasil, and so we see a lot of Gardasil claims, but I'd say primarily flu and needle injuries. One of the things about this program that people don't realize is that you can get compensation even if it's not the vaccine that causes you injury. A lot of people will get the shot, and the needle itself will cause injury to them, and it'll be to their shoulder. So we see a lot of the flu vaccinations are the ones that I see primarily in terms of the vaccination itself causing harm, but there's also the needle injuries, and that's simply because vaccinations require a needle typically, and so just numerically it's a higher number of things.
Yeah, when I was investigating the payouts, it looked like about 60% of the compensated cases are from the flu vaccine. So it makes sense that you would see more of that.
Yeah.
Have you handled any cases where the claimant died or the family's filing for death?
Yes, actually I'm handling one now. Unfortunately, our client had a flu vaccine and developed Guillain-Barré syndrome. Now the court and some of the medical providers have deemed it to be ALS, but it's a claim we're continuing to pursue right now. Unfortunately, our client passed away, and as a result, we're now in the process of changing it to add his estate and file for a death associated with the vaccination.
Okay. And we've heard that most deaths for children are awarded in the amount of about $250,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, according to the Act, $250,000 is paid for a death. That's just what they give. Obviously, it's inadequate in my book.
It's totally inadequate.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There are some ways to get more than that, but a lot of it is going to be dealing with compensation for incurred expenses associated with the adverse reaction and getting medical treatment to treat that.
And is there any circumstance where that could vary?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what they'll try to do is they'll pay for things, extra costs that are associated with dealing with the adverse reaction.
Okay.
So that's where you can have it be different than the $250,000.
Okay. Is there a max payout that you've seen?
A lot of it, what you're going to see is if people have an adverse reaction, unfortunately, oftentimes it's permanent. And so what you'll see is the largest amounts of compensation go to those people that do not die, but need to have medical assistance for the remainder of their life.
Right. Can you briefly step us through the process from injury to compensation?
Yeah, basically what ends up happening is someone gets a vaccination, and that's the first thing that happens, and then they suffer an adverse reaction. Then typically what happens is they don't really know what's going on. They go to their doctors, and it takes a bit of time. And actually, one of the things I would like to really point out that people should be aware of is how important medical records are in these types of claims. and how important it is to inform your doctor of your symptoms consistently. Gaps in medical records are a big thing that the court looks at in terms of whether they're going to file or find a claim to be compensable. So you want to tell your doctor quickly when you have an adverse reaction and consistently, so they're in that medical record. Getting back to the question that you asked
that's okay.
now, they will then have a period of time in which they're going to medical providers and trying to just figure out what's going on with them. And then eventually at some point, if they actually call us, someone's saying, hey, this could be the result of a vaccination. And then they will reach out and they'll do their investigation, find an attorney that works in this area. At that point, they will hire an attorney. The attorney will get the medical records and do a review. And then if we believe that there's a reasonable basis and good faith basis for filing a claim, we file a petition with the Federal Court of Claims in Washington, D.C. At that juncture, we file an affidavit of our client that talks about everything that's happened to them, along with supporting medical records. The respondent will have an attorney. The fund has attorneys that are full-time staff. They will review the petition and the medical records that we supply and make a determination whether they believe that the claim is compensable at that juncture. If it is compensable, then you go into just dealing with what would be appropriate compensation for our client. Oftentimes, there are certain types of claims in which they are more ready to say are compensable. Needle injury claims are just easier to prove medically, so they go quicker, more likely to be deemed compensable. Then the type of claim breaks down to either an on-table or an off-table injury. An on-table injury are claims that the court itself deems as just valid, and what it ends up happening is you have a reaction that is diagnosed by medical providers, and it's within a certain time frame of a vaccination. And so the court has put together a table that says if you have this type of syndrome or diagnosis, reaction, within a certain amount of time of this vaccination, it'll be considered an on-table injury. Then those are going to be deemed compensable very quickly unless the respondent can prove that in fact something else caused it. But that would be the quicker route, would be an on-table injury. An off-table injury are things in which the court does not say there's a presumption of compensability. You have a bigger burden of proof at that point. Don't want to bore you with too much detail on that, but you really have to get expert testimony to be able to explain to the court why the symptoms or the syndrome that my client has are in fact the result of the vaccination. So if you have an on-table injury, at that point they deem it compensable, then you go into kind of settlement negotiations on what would be appropriate compensation. The off-table injury cases just take longer and it requires more effort. That's where you can really get into years and years. Eventually, hopefully you can convince the court that in fact it is compensable. If that occurs, then you get back into the settlement negotiations and you hopefully reach a settlement. If you and the respondent cannot come to an agreement, you can have a special master oversee and make a ruling on compensability. But the other option, unfortunately, sometimes the special master deems that the claim is not compensable and therefore can dismiss it. So that's basically kind of the different ways it can go from the beginning to end on a petition.
Okay, I have two questions in there. I didn't want to interrupt you. As far as it getting onto the table, do you have any idea of the process of how things end up on a table? Because I know that families are very frustrated. Multiple situations continue to occur. They tell their stories, but that's not ending up on the table, even though that's happening to, there's hundreds or even thousands of people documenting the same situation. It's not on the table. So I'm curious if you know anything about the process on how things would get onto the table.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to, at some point, the level of proof gets to be so high that they reluctantly say, okay, we will place this as an on-table injury. But it's one of the problems and one of the things that I found in working in this area is that there is just so much that we don't know right now. And it's a frustrating thing, is that there's not a discovery process for these types of claims. And so getting valid information is difficult. That results in making it more difficult to get enough information to convince the court that this in fact is a connection that we've now deemed reliable enough that that type of claim resulting from this type of vaccination should be considered an on-table injury.
Right, and you're not able to collect that from private industry because Freedom of Information Act is only applies to government agencies, correct? So
Yeah.
even if there were some internal information from a pharmaceutical company on a product, them knowing that there was an issue with it, you wouldn't be able to even get access to that, correct?
Right, and that's what makes, with this act as much help as it does for families, there's just a restriction on discovery that is different from other areas of law that I practice, which does make it more difficult to find the information that I think everyone would really like to know. So we could get a better understanding as to who may be susceptible to vaccinations and what can be done to make them safer, or what can we do to make sure that the public is not harmed, or at least limit the risk of harm as much as possible. So it's just a little different. A lot of good things about this act, but that is one thing that I think I would like to see a little bit of a change on.
Yeah, and then my other question would be, I know a lot of families have complained they've had issue with getting the special testimony for getting proof, the expert witnesses, that some of them are being denied certain
Yes.
expert witnesses. Now, how have you seen any issue with that, where people have come in and said, hey, I've got this expert witness, and I mean they're totally a credible witness, but they're being denied that particular witness for some reason?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it definitely happens, and it's one of the things that is particularly difficult in this area. Other areas of law that I've practiced in, there isn't as much scrutiny of the experts that are being brought up on the case. It is very common that the credentials of an expert will be highly scrutinized for these types of cases. I know that the court in general likes neurologists and immunologists in these types of cases, but if you get someone who has a little bit of a different educational and medical background, it's highly scrutinized and it's difficult. They can oftentimes just say that they don't believe their testimony or won't consider it because they don't have the credentials that the court is used to seeing.
Yeah. Now, do you see a difference in, like, say there's two immunologists and they're just disagreeing? Do they tend to choose the one that sides with the government, or? I mean, or have you seen that as maybe you haven't encountered that? I'm just.
Well, what will end up happening is you can have the battle of the experts,
right?
And that happens in all areas of law. In this one, I don't necessarily see that it goes one way or the other. What I found to be kind of the biggest problem is just finding experts that have the necessary experience to be able to present their opinion in the format that the court wants. And so the difference would be that the respondent, who is working for the government and does this full time and everything, they can just go back to the same experts that they've used, and the court is used to seeing those. But if you bring in different experts that maybe are not as experienced in working in this system, the way they relay their opinions can be scrutinized, and the court can simply say, we don't want to accept this because it's not matching the criteria that the court has set out. So if you find a good expert, you want to keep them.
Now, is there, going off cuff here a little bit, but is there anywhere where somebody could, expert witnesses could access what is required of them so they can be more efficient, so they're more likely to be able to get into the system and
Certainly, and that's one of the things that my firm does, is there's a case, the Alton case, which sets forth the criteria for setting for expert opinions. And has 3 different factors, and so we work with experts to try to help them understand how to present their opinions. There's also a vaccine injury petition bar based in Florida that I'm part of, and what that allows us to do is try to work with other attorneys that have claims and petitions in front of the Federal Court of Claims and get their insight on, one, how can we help educate less experienced experts so they can present their opinions in the right manner, but also it's a great resource for our firm on being able to find experts as well. So there's different things that we do to try to make sure that the opinions that we present, we give it the best shot we can to make sure the court hopefully will accept it.
That's excellent. That's very good to know. So that is located on your website then, for those that would want to access it. There's a
link to the we have different links that people can access on our website.
Okay, awesome. I've been told that attorneys sometimes have to fight for things like cost of diapers and things like that. I mean, essential items that are over the course of a person's life, but they seem like it's kind of intricate. Do you deal with getting that specific in
Certainly, if you,
Okay.
and this is the most complex, is going to be someone who has permanent injury from a vaccination but did not pass away. And there's this thing called a life plan, and you get an expert that does this analysis for your client, and they can explain what all are the costs that are associated with that this person needs for their care and maintenance through the remainder of their life. They get very intricate.
Okay.
But the overall goal for this fund is to try to provide compensation that will help this person who's had an adverse reaction, their life has been ruined, but give them money that can help take care of them for their expected, for the remainder of their expected life.
Okay. What would you tell a person or a family who suspects a vaccine injury? Like, what is the most important pieces of information they need to gather initially?
First, I want them to know that there's actually a fund set up to provide compensation. As I've gotten more involved in this, I've been alarmingly shocked at how little is known about this fund amongst the general public, but also again, amongst medical practitioners. They just don't even know that this exists.
They don't have a clue.
Right, and so it's, unfortunately, I've had situations, and this will get to the second thing that's very important for them, but I've had situations where family has come to me with this 7 or 8 year old child that has had horrible medical issues, and they link it to the vaccination. But the vaccination occurred so long ago that the time has run out to actually file a petition. And so that's one of the things that is frustrating for me, because there is a lack of public awareness, and then you have people that may have had a viable claim, but they didn't know about this fund. They didn't know what to do. And so the time has passed. You have 3 years from the date of onset of first symptoms to file a petition. If you miss it, you cannot file a petition. You cannot get compensation. So I'd say another important thing is to know when you see these symptoms, talk to your doctor about it. Talk to a neurologist or an immunologist. Try to get information on this and get it documented in the medical records, and then act. Contact an attorney who does this, because you don't want to wait so long. That would be another thing that I think is very important.
Now, a lot of parents are having issues when they report what happened to their child. The doctor is denying the connection. Now, and most parents don't realize they can still report to the to VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. They can report it. They do not have to wait for their physician to report it. Although the AMA Code of Ethics specifically states that all physicians should report even minor suspect of a vaccine injury. They are required, or they're supposed to be doing that. So, but that's it's not playing out that way.
Right.
So parents do need to know that that's available to them. Now, one question I'd like to know is, do they have to have reported to VAERS before they can submit a claim, or did they not have had to even use that process to go through?
You don't have to ever report it to VAERS.
Okay.
VAERS is just an information collection site.
Okay.
Completely different. Now, typically what we do is we want to make sure, if we sign up a client, that we do report it.
Because that might have to do with the injury table. I mean, long term.
Yeah.
You definitely want it to go on record somewhere as being a reported injury,
Certainly. I think for us, what we want to do is try to find as much valid information about what's going on, and because ultimately that can lead to policy changes that can help protect people. So yeah, I mean, you don't have to file a VAERS report in order to file a petition or anything like that.
Okay. And then what about those that, I mean, again, the reality is there are some parents who have had issues with the records when they try, as soon as they start asking. I have told parents before, get your records before you say too much. I mean, I hate to say that out loud, but in a way, if they're going and they're asking questions and they're relating to the vaccine, we've seen where the hospital, even in discharge papers, will say, parent was concerned about it being caused from a vaccine, but it wasn't. I mean, and this is in discharge, but they have no proof that it wasn't. They're just simply making the statement kind of to cover themselves. So how does that play out when you're trying to get records? I mean, would you suggest to the parent that they obtain medical records or tests or anything like that before they start talking about it being vaccines too much? Because I mean, I'm just concerned because sometimes they're not getting, or I've even had parents tell me that a shot was not listed. Like they went and got a vaccine, they had a reaction, and then all of a sudden that record went missing. I mean, that's a serious concern for some of these parents. I don't know if you've had anyone tell you that happened, but I mean, I've definitely had a lot of parents say that to me, so that's very concerning. Would you recommend that they gather tests and things before saying the vaccine word out loud, or do you think they should just go ahead and say, hey, this is what I think it is, and then hopefully all the records stay as put.
Right. It's a tough one because I've actually just had a fact hearing where we had deposition of my client because there is a big issue on date of onset of symptoms. When we were going through her medical records, because she actually worked for a medical facility, and when she got her records, she was adamant that they were not accurate. And so one of the things that I found is that when people go to a doctor, the doctor may not know about this fund, and honestly, they may fear personal liability. That's another thing that one of the goals of this fund is to allow doctors to realize that they're not going to be sued for these things.
Right.
But doctors don't know about it, from what I've seen. And so there is a fear when you go to the doctor, especially when you go to the doctor who administered the vaccine.
Yeah.
But I've also seen where doctors will quickly say, yeah, we believe that this is associated with the vaccine.
Yeah, that has happened, yeah.
Right, and if you have that in a medical record, that's very powerful in front of the court. A treating physician who will support your claim and says that they believe that there is a connection between the adverse reaction and the vaccine is very powerful evidence in front of this court. So I can't really give a steadfast rule on that. I can see where there are instances where maybe an uneducated or unaware physician may fear. I certainly hope they don't do that, but people do crazy things. I have seen instances where my client has said these medical records are not accurate, but I've also seen medical records that are very supportive of my client's petition and claim. So I don't think there's one steadfast rule, but if you trust your doctor, and if that doctor has indicated a connection between the vaccination and the adverse reaction, I certainly think that that's powerful evidence that you would like to get.
Yeah, certainly. At what point in the process should they contact you? Like as soon as possible?
Mm-hmm. Okay. If they believe that they or a loved one has had an adverse reaction to a vaccination, you want to contact an attorney as soon as possible, because we can help with such things as VAERS reporting and making sure that our client is going to the right doctors and reporting things accurately. For me, dealing with injured people, I tell them there's kind of two goals that I have for them. One is they come to me and they've had something bad happen to them and they're physically injured. And the most important thing is to have their health restored. So I say, I'm a lawyer, like I can try to get compensation for this, but the most important thing, the first thing, is to get better. And so we can try to help. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to be able to say that I can give medical treatment or anything like that.
Right.
But we can try to help if there's certain doctors that they need to see. We can try to help that process so they can just get feeling better as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And that's like the primary goal for me, for my clients. Secondarily is actually what I do for a living, and that is to try to get compensation. And so if they go to an attorney early, then we can try to help make sure they have the medical treatment they need to get better, or heal as much as they can, but also help with the process of setting up the evidence necessary to give you the highest percent chance of having your claim actually accepted and receiving compensation.
Okay. Did you have any closing thoughts, any lessons you've learned, or anything you want to leave with the viewers?
The biggest thing for me is, just an awareness of this program. And the government has said that there are adverse reactions to these vaccines. And I know that people have a wide range of views on vaccinations. But it's clear that there are some people that will have adverse reactions to a vaccination. And when that happens, it will likely devastate the remainder of their life. And so it's important just to know that this fund exists and there's a process of being able to file this petition and seek compensation. Overall, in terms of what I do, you want to talk to an attorney that has experience doing this, so they give you the most help and increase your chances of getting actual compensation for your adverse reaction, the devastating impact that it's had.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you can take cases outside of Ohio.
Oh yeah. That's another thing.
Federal.
Yeah, because it's federal. It's a federal claim. It's a federal act. It allows us to actually take cases from all across the nation. We have people in Mississippi and North Carolina, all over already, and we can help them wherever they are.
Good. Well, we appreciate you so much, everything that you're doing to serve the vaccine-injured community in Ohio and across the country. For those looking for assistance, for support in the area of vaccine injury, you can follow Braden's page, Vaccine Injury Victims, on Facebook, and you can also visit his website at dnblaw.com. Thank you so much, Braden, for being
Thank
here.
you.
I appreciate your time.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.